Hey, who left Grandpa in charge of national security? They laughed. They thought he was just the old man at the fence. Forgotten, overlooked, until the night the campus went dark. Sirens wailed, power failed, cadets scrambled in panic. And while everyone else fumbled through the blackout, he was already there, waiting, watching. Then through the pouring rain, he stepped out of the shadows, faced a SWAT team twice his size, and said 5 words that made them freeze. "You're late. They're already gone." To them, he was just a gate guard until the night proved he was the last real soldier standing. To most people at Crestmore Veterans Academy, Walter Braddock was just a shadow in the fog, a figure that drifted through the gates at sundown and disappeared again before breakfast. No one knew where he lived or how he got there. He simply appeared, thermos in one hand, clipboard in the other, and that same worn security jacket with a patch sewn crooked over the name W. Braddock. They called him the Ghost. Not out of fear, there was nothing threatening about Walter, but out of disregard. He was quiet, almost too quiet for a place full of young cadets bursting with noise and bravado. He didn't bark orders, didn't pace with a walkie-talkie or issue citations. He didn't even carry a flashlight half the time. He just watched and waited. Every night like clockwork, he arrived at the back gate. Gate 4, the least trafficked, the least visible. He checked the perimeter not once but twice. Walked the fence line, tapped every latch, glanced up at each flickering light, and paused at the southeast corner, always the southeast corner, for a full 10 seconds before moving on. No one knew why. The younger cadets joked about him. He probably fought in the Civil War, one snorted. "I bet his thermos is older than our barracks," another laughed. Even the officers got in on it, sometimes though, behind closed doors. Lieutenant Myers once quipped over coffee, "He's like a lawn ornament with security clearance." The others chuckled. Walter, for his part, said nothing. He never did. Not when the jokes started. Not when they echoed down the halls as he passed. Not even when someone once left a pair of retirement brochures tucked under his clipboard. Instead, Walter just did his job. Quietly, methodically. His routine never changed. Check the gate. Walk the fence. Watch the monitors. Log the patrols. Keep the logbook. Every entry was neat, handwritten. No abbreviations, no errors. He never missed a shift. Not once. Even on stormy nights when the wind howled through the academy grounds like an old battlefield ghost. Walter stood by the booth collar, turned up, eyes steady on the trees. To most, he was invisible. But to a few, just a few, he was something else. Cadet Ellen McCrae noticed first. On her very first week, she had saluted him out of sheer instinct. He returned it not lazily, not playfully, but crisply, without a word. That small moment stuck with her. She watched him after that. How he always logged the weather conditions in his notebook. How he stared at the camera feeds like they were maps to something deeper. How he moved not slowly but deliberately, like every step counted. He never offered advice, never told war stories, never interrupted. But something about him didn't quite fit the jokes. He wasn't just forgotten. He was watching something they didn't see. And in the months to come, Ellen would realize something that changed the way she saw everyone else at the academy. While others shouted to be heard, Walter Braddock didn't speak unless he had to. And when he did, people remembered it. Lieutenant Logan Myers had a voice that carried through walls and an ego to match. Fresh from his 3rd commendation in as many years, he marched through Crestmore like he owned it. Young, confident, and full of textbook protocol, Myers believed in 2 things, speed and strength. Anything outside of that he dismissed, especially Walter Braddock. He's still logging with a pen. Myers scoffed one morning in the mess hall loud enough for cadets at 3 tables to hear. "What's next, Morse code and smoke signals?" The cadets laughed on cue. To them it was harmless banter. A few imitated Walter's slow, measured walk. One mimed sipping from an imaginary thermos. Another joked about installing a rocking chair at Gate 4. No one expected a reaction because Walter never gave one. He simply arrived each night like always at precisely 6:00 p.m. Nodded at the gate officer, checked his logbook, took his quiet post. But the jokes grew sharper. "He probably thinks satellite surveillance is witchcraft," someone said during training. "I heard he used to guard a payphone," another chimed in. It wasn't just the words. It was the tone. Dismissive, condescending. They saw Walter not as someone who had served, but someone who had somehow outlived his usefulness. A leftover. Lieutenant Myers didn't stop at jokes either. He made a show of it. One night during inspection rounds, he marched up to Walter's booth and rapped twice on the glass like he was knocking on a fish tank. "You awake in there?" Braddock Myers grinned. "We got real security work to do, not post-it notes and coffee breaks." Walter didn't flinch. He simply turned the page in his logbook and made a note. That was his way. He didn't argue. He didn't correct. He recorded. He had notebooks, dozens of them lined neatly on a shelf in the booth. Not just patrol logs, observations, wind patterns, camera blind spots, cadet behaviors, entries scribbled in exacting detail. Dates, times, names. Ellen McCrae noticed. Again. She had kept saluting him every evening since that first week. Not because anyone told her to, not because he expected it, but because somehow she felt it was earned. And every time he returned it, a crisp, clean salute. No smile, no words, just respect, quiet and steady. One night as Myers passed by and lobbed another jab something about Walter's Civil War tactics, Ellen turned slightly and saw it. Walter's pen paused mid-note just for a second, not trembling, just still. Then he resumed. It was the first time she realized Walter heard everything, and yet he never defended himself. He didn't need to, because he wasn't listening for insults. He was listening for patterns. In a place where noise ruled, Walter had made silence his strength, and while others mocked his pace, his methods, his age, he was watching, always watching, not out of suspicion, but because he knew something no one else did. Respect doesn't come from a title or a rank. It comes from what you choose to see and what you choose to ignore. The wind shifted in mid-October. Not enough for most to notice, just a colder edge in the air and a whisper through the pine trees along the perimeter fence. But Walter Braddock noticed. He always noticed. That week, something began to itch at the edges of his routine. At 02:03 on a Wednesday morning, the southeast quadrant camera flickered twice. Not long, barely a hiccup in the feed. Most would have blamed a voltage surge or an aging circuit, but Walter paused the footage and leaned closer. In the frame, a branch that had always hung straight now sagged slightly, bent at an angle, subtle, deliberate. He rewound the footage twice, then checked the live feed. Same branch, still bent. That afternoon, he walked the southeast fence line slowly, measured, stepped off the distance from the back access road to the tree line. Something didn't sit right. The dirt around the base of the fence had been disturbed. Not torn, no dragging marks or footprints. But the leaves were unsettled and a small chunk of bark had been peeled from the post. Fresh. Back in the booth, he reviewed the last 5 nights of surveillance. At 01:47, 2 nights earlier, a flicker in the same quadrant. No movement, no sound, just a subtle blink. And again the next night at 03:12. Patterns. Walter didn't jump to conclusions. He documented everything: date, time, camera location, and environmental conditions. He marked the wind speed and direction, even the temperature drop. When the report was complete, he printed it neatly, tucked it into a manila folder, and walked it to the command office. Captain Reeds wasn't in. A young lieutenant accepted the folder with the same disinterest one gives a cafeteria menu. Walter nodded once and left without a word. By the next evening, nothing had changed. No follow-up, no inspection crew. The camera still flickered at intervals, always southeast, always between 1 and 3 a.m. That Friday, during evening briefing, Lieutenant Myers strolled past Walter's post with a smug grin. "You still chasing shadows out there, Braddock?" he asked loud enough for cadets nearby to hear. "Word is you filed a report about—" "What was it again?" He tapped his chin. "Ah, yes, bent twigs and squirrel espionage." The cadets chuckled. One mimed tiptoeing with tiny claws. Another added, "lock down the academy." "The rodents are mobilizing." Walter, seated with his clipboard resting across one knee, didn't look up. He flipped the page and scribbled a note. That made Myers frown. "What are you writing now, huh?" he pushed. "Ghost stories. Do us all a favor and stick to gate duty, old man. We'll handle the real threats." Walter didn't answer, but his hand kept moving, a quiet rhythm of ink scratching onto paper. Cadet Ellen McCrae watched from the edge of the group. She didn't laugh, didn't smirk. Something in Walter's stillness made her stomach tighten. Later that night, long after the lights in the dormitories had gone out, she passed the security booth on her way to the comms building. The blinds were half drawn, but she could see Walter inside replaying camera footage frame by frame. The flicker came again, and this time in the corner of the frame, barely visible, was movement. Not an animal, not a blur, a shift, deliberate, calculated, just outside the sensor range. Walter leaned in, froze the image, and adjusted the contrast slightly. A footprint, faint but there. She stepped back from the booth window, goosebumps crawling up her arms. Walter never looked up, but quietly beneath the buzz of campus floodlights, the ghost at the gate was already preparing for something no one else could see. Walter Braddock had been patient. Too patient, perhaps. But after the third unexplained flicker on the southeast feed and a full week of quiet anomalies, he took it a step further. No longer content with internal reports, he drafted a new document, typed this time, but signed by hand. 4 pages long with 3 photos printed and taped inside. The last page was a diagram blind zones between cameras, an overlapping pattern of interference timing, and his own notes in red ink highlighting predicted points of breach. He sealed it in a tan envelope, wrote to General Sarah Whitmore personal review on the front, and walked it to the main admin building. He didn't give it to Lieutenant Myers. He didn't leave it on a general inbox tray. He handed it directly to Sergeant Alicia Monroe Whitmore's personal aide during her lunch break. "Just make sure she sees this," he said simply. Monroe looked confused but took the envelope. "Sure thing, Mr. Braddock." He nodded, turned, and walked back out into the drizzle. That night, clouds rolled in heavy and low. Wind picked up from the east. It smelled like rain and something else metallic, faint but sharp. Walter began his patrol earlier than usual. At 9:47 p.m., he reached the southeast quadrant and crouched near the fence where he'd placed a small rock earlier in the day as a marker. The rock had been moved, just 2 inches, but moved. Beneath it, fresh boot prints, deeper than his own. Wider, heavier. Military-grade tread, not academy-issued. No cadet had any reason to be outside the fence, and no drill was scheduled. Walter took out his small leather notebook and drew the print by hand. Then he stood and scanned the tree line. Still, silent. He didn't carry a weapon, just his flashlight and his memory. Back at the booth, he added the new print sketch to his previous logs, then wrote another report. This time, he hand-delivered it to Command Office Night Watch at 11:22 p.m., signed it, and even highlighted the perimeter breach. The night officer on duty, a new cadet, barely old enough to vote, read the top line, shrugged, and dropped it into the outbox without looking up. "No drills tonight, sir. Probably just a gardener or something." Walter nodded slowly. "Sure." At 03:10 a.m., the southeast camera flickered again. The report was logged. No alarms were raised. No one came. And the envelope meant for General Whitmore. It never left Monroe's desk. She forgot it under a pile of requisition forms. By the time the next evening rolled around, Walter stood once again at the edge of the fence line, thermos-untouched eyes scanning the shadows. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't go over anyone's head. He just wrote it all down, every missed sign, every blind eye, every inch of ground the intruder took. Because he'd seen this pattern before, and patterns he knew always end one of 2 ways: ignored or confirmed. It happened at exactly 3:17 a.m. One moment, Crestmore Veterans Academy was wrapped in uneasy sleep dorm windows, faintly glowing surveillance monitors humming night guards, yawning between rounds. The next moment, everything went black. A sharp pop in the main power grid, then silence. No lights, no alarms, no surveillance feed. The emergency generators, newly installed, proudly funded, failed to engage. Darkness swallowed the campus whole. Cadets bolted upright in their bunks, hearts pounding in the thick silence. Someone screamed. Someone else knocked over a metal footlocker. Doors slammed. Feet thudded down stairwells. In the chaos, the air buzzed with a single unspoken thought. "This isn't a drill." Inside the command post, Lieutenant Myers shouted into a dead radio. No signal. No response. No control. Where's the damn backup power? All across the academy, voices cracked in panic. Security teams scrambled blindly with handheld flashlights that flickered as if unsure of their duty. Confusion roared through the halls louder than any siren ever could. But at the west gate, Walter Braddock was already standing. He hadn't been sleeping. He rarely did, especially on nights when the air hung too still, when the wind shifted wrong, when his instincts stirred with old warnings. He lit his flashlight. Not one of the department-issued plastic cylinders. His was heavy metal scratched with age, but dependable. Then he reached into the storage shelf under his desk and pulled out something no one had seen him carry before, an old service revolver wrapped in oiled cloth. He didn't hesitate. Boots laced, hat pulled low. He moved through the dark like he'd been trained for it decades ago, because he had. Others ran toward noise. Walter moved toward silence. He circled the perimeter, cutting through hedges and ducking beneath a low-hanging drain pipe. His path curved wide, avoiding the camera dead zones he knew by heart. When he reached the edge of the mess hall, he paused. Something was wrong. The back entrance door, usually triple locked, was slightly ajar. Walter scanned the ground. A muddy boot print, fresh and wrong. Wider than cadet issue, shallow in the heel, deep at the toe. Someone had been running, not just moving, retreating. He knelt beside the door frame and found what he was looking for. The wiring panel had been cut. Clean. Expertly. This wasn't a prank. Not a test. This was precision. He holstered the revolver beneath his jacket, pulled a stub of pencil from his pocket, and marked the doorframe with a single X. Then he turned back toward the interior of campus, not toward the command office. Not toward Lieutenant Myers, who would no doubt still be yelling at a blank screen. Walter moved toward the water tower, because if he were the one breaching an academy, the tower would be the next blind spot worth hiding behind. Back at the command post, cadets were huddling, some shouting, some crying. Myers had kicked over a chair in frustration, demanding answers no one could give. "Where's Braddock?" "Get me Braddock," he barked. No one answered. But Walter was already 3 steps ahead, moving through the dark like he had a map no one else had seen. Because he did. And as the chaos surged behind him, he muttered just 2 words under his breath. Too late. Rain had started to fall by the time the helicopters circled overhead. 23 minutes too late. The SWAT trucks rolled through Crestmer's east gate in a blur of flashing lights and black armor. Boots hit the ground fast. Voices barked commands. Rifles swept the dark corners. But the intruders, whoever they were, had already vanished into the trees behind the water tower, leaving nothing but soaked dirt, a flickering sensor, and Walter Braddock standing at the edge of it all. He was soaked to the bone, his jacket clinging to him like it had grown from the rain itself. Hat tilted low, revolver back in its holster, and the same calm in his eyes that had always made people underestimate him. He stood at the rear access road, not blocking, but waiting. A SWAT captain stepped forward, visor lifted. "Who are you?" Walter held up a thick, weather-stained notebook, pages curled at the corners from water and wear. "I'm the one who warned you," he said. The captain hesitated but took the notebook. Inside, a full page with time-stamped movements, breach points, camera downtimes, blind spots, even probable identities based on past footage, weight distribution, and boot print depth. Handwritten, precise. Weeks of observations mapped out to the minute. He had predicted the path, the exit, even the method manual panel, bypass and wire cuts. Another officer leaned over the captain's shoulder, flipping to the back pages. "There's a name here," he said, stunned. 2, actually. That's when Lieutenant Myers arrived, boots slapping puddles. "Hold it right there," he shouted. "He's just a guard. He has no clearance." Walter didn't move. Neither did the SWAT captain. "Sir, we have reason to believe this man had operational foresight on the breach," the captain replied flatly. "He's making it up. He's just Myers started." Walter looked up just once and spoke. "You're late," he said quietly. A pause. "They're already gone." Myers opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The SWAT team didn't ask more questions. They just followed Walter's notes. Morning came slowly at Crestmer. The power had returned, but the academy still felt dark. Cadets whispered in the halls, unsure of what exactly had happened the night before. The SWAT trucks were still parked near the southern gate. Their operators moved in hushed tones, glancing occasionally toward the west fence line, toward the place where an old man had handed them a map more accurate than any satellite feed. At precisely 0800, a single black SUV rolled through the academy's main entrance. No convoy, no sirens, just tinted windows and silence. Out stepped General Sarah Whitmore. No one was expecting her. She wore a plain uniform, no medals, no ribbons, just the 3 silver stars on her collar and the unmistakable air of authority that needed no introduction. She walked directly into the officers' building without so much as a glance at the salutes offered to her. Lieutenant Myers was already in the meeting room surrounded by restless junior officers and command aides. He was mid-sentence flipping through a mess of printed incident reports when the door opened. Everyone stood. Whitmore said nothing. She walked to the front of the room, a simple manila folder in her hand. Her expression was unreadable. She placed the folder on the table, opened it, and pulled out a single photo. It was old edges worn. In the picture, a younger version of herself in full combat gear standing beside another soldier, taller face, harder uniform dusted with Afghan sand. Walter Braddock. Someone in the back of the room gasped. Someone else whispered, "No way." Whitmore let the silence settle before speaking. "You all ignored weeks of breach patterns. You dismissed hard data. And you laughed at the man who built the very threat response protocol you failed to follow?" She looked straight at Myers. "This man," she continued, tapping the photo, "was once my commanding officer. He led joint response teams in 3 combat zones. He's the reason half the rescue logistics you use in this building exist." Myers stiffened, color draining from his face. "Ma'am, with respect, I wasn't informed of his." She cut him off. "You were informed. You just didn't listen." She closed the folder. "Effective immediately, Lieutenant Myers. You are relieved of all security oversight. Report to administrative duty until further notice." No one said a word. Whitmore turned to the room. "From this moment forward, every officer here will read Walter Braddock's full report cover to cover. You'll memorize it if you have to." Then without ceremony, she left the room. As the door closed behind her, the officers looked at one another stunned. And in the West Guard booth, Walter sat alone. Same uniform, same thermos. But now cadets passing by slowed their pace, and for the first time they saluted first. Walter Braddock didn't make speeches. He didn't attend farewell parties or pose for photos. So when the West Gate opened one morning and he wasn't there, no one was surprised, but everyone felt it. His booth was empty, thermos gone, clipboard missing, just a folded jacket left neatly on the chair. The name patch faded, but still legible. Underneath it, taped to the desk, was a single sheet of paper. 6 words written in steady, deliberate script, guard what they overlook. WB, no signature, no date, no explanation. Just that final note, half instruction, half farewell. For the next hour, a stream of cadets stopped by the booth. Some stood in silence. Others reached out and touched the old jacket like it held something sacred. Even officers approached quietly, removing their caps out of instinct, not regulation. By noon, word had spread. Walter Braddock had retired. No ceremony, no medals. Just gone. That afternoon, a new figure appeared at the post. Cadet Ellen McCrae. No one assigned her there. She wasn't ordered. She simply arrived at 1800 hours dressed in a clean uniform with a firm expression and took up watch at the West Gate. Her movements were familiar, slow, intentional. She checked the locks 3 times, walked the fence line, paused at the southeast corner for exactly 10 seconds, eyes scanning the trees. Tucked inside her vest pocket, zipped tight and close to her heart, was Walter's notebook. She didn't carry it for show. She studied it. She lived by it. At first, some of the younger cadets raised eyebrows. "She's not security," one muttered. "Why's she standing guard?" But no one questioned her twice. There was something in the way she stood, quiet but alert, calm but sharp, that reminded them of someone else. A week later, a brass plaque was quietly installed at the gate Braddock post. In honor of steadfast watch, Ellen didn't speak at the small gathering that formed that evening. She just stood at the gate, hands folded behind her back, watching the horizon the way he used to. Because Walter hadn't left them instructions, he'd left them an example. Long after Walter Braddock vanished from Cressmer's grounds, the academy still spoke of the night the lights went out. Cadets whispered about it in the dorms. Instructors referenced it without naming names. And during orientation week, upperclassmen would point toward the West Gate and say, "That's where it happened. That's where the ghost stood his ground." They all remembered the moment. "You're late. They're already gone." 5 words, spoken without anger, without fear, without ego. 5 words that stopped a SWAT team in their tracks and exposed every flaw in the system. In time, those 5 words became something more than a story. They became a standard. New cadets came and went, but Walter's notebook, still encased in glass behind the security desk, was never touched. Ellen McCrae made sure of that. She still stood watch, not every day, but often enough that the younger cadets began mimicking her routine, walking the fence line, checking the locks twice, pausing at the southeast corner just a little longer than needed. She never raised her voice. She didn't have to, because something had shifted at Cressmer. The loudest cadets began to listen more. Those who once boasted now asked questions instead. Leadership started to look less like barking orders and more like being the last one still standing when the noise faded. Ellen became a quiet legend in her own right, not for what she said, but for what she didn't say. She trained cadets with calm precision, taught them how to read wind patterns, how to see what others miss, how to write everything down, even the things no one believed. One night during a surprise drill, a second-year cadet noticed a blind spot on the eastern camera feed. He didn't panic, didn't shout. He walked to the west gate, stood beside Ellen, and simply said, "I think you need to see something." She smiled. Walter would have approved. Years later, when that same cadet graduated, he left a small note tucked behind the plaque at Braddock Post. It said, "Be steady, speak only when needed." He didn't sign it. He didn't have to. At Cressmer, they still remember, because legends don't need to speak loudly. They just need to be heard once. Walter Braddock may have stood watch at a quiet gate on a quiet campus, but his story echoes far beyond Cressmer. In a world where noise often drowns out wisdom, where titles speak louder than experience, Walter reminded us that true leadership isn't measured by volume. It's revealed in silence, in vigilance, and in the choices we make when no one is watching. Today, many older Americans, veterans, retired workers, neighbors who once carried weight on their shoulders, find themselves overlooked, dismissed as relics of another time. But as Walter proved, being quiet does not mean being irrelevant, and age does not mean you're finished. Sometimes it means you're the only one left who still knows where to look. In our fast-paced world, maybe it's time we listen more to the ones who don't speak often. Maybe the steady hand, the long memory, and the quiet wisdom are exactly what we need most. What do you think? Have you known someone like Walter? Someone underestimated but essential? Do we value quiet vigilance enough in today's society? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Share your stories. Let others know that being seen doesn't always require being loud. If this story moved you, inspired you, or reminded you of someone in your life, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who might need a reminder. Respect is earned in silence every day. Thank you for watching and for honoring the forgotten guardians who still stand watch.